Hey there, I'm Adrienne, transformation coach and your go-to gal for navigating grief and loss. On this show, we're not shying away from tough conversations. Let's talk about how we're really feeling and how to show up in our lives even though so many hard things have happened. Loss and grief are tough topics, but witnessing each other's pain and getting really honest about what we want our lives to look like in our next chapter is the way forward. You're not broken. You deserve happiness. And even though you might not think that's possible, or even feel like your life is over, I'm here to show you that you can feel peace, purpose, and joy again. Let's talk about all things change, loss, and grief, and how to move forward so we can create a life we love. Welcome to the Living with Loss podcast. Hey there, I'm Adrienne. Welcome to Living with Loss. Today, I wanted to talk about grief coaching. What that is, why you would work with a coach when you're in grief, and how that's different from therapy. So, I recently held my Living with Loss grief circle, which you can sign up for the next one. If you go to my website, there'll be a banner at the top of the page and you can click on it. And also in the show notes, there'll be a link if you're interested. So I hosted my Living with Loss grief circle, and I sent a survey out to the participants afterwards. Somebody mentioned that they didn't fully understand the idea of working with a coach and how that's different than working with a therapist. This grief circle, we met to talk about expectations around grief. And so there are some exercises around that, but a lot of it was holding space, sharing the experience of what it's like to feel the expectations of others when you're grieving and also the expectations you put on yourself. So I didn't structure it like a workshop where I did this full introduction and explained what I did. I didn't do a sales pitch at the end for my one-to-one services, which that information is available on my website. I provided the link, but I didn't go super in depth because the purpose of the grief circle really is it's a free space for people that are grieving to connect and really just understand what each other's going through. So I get the survey and there's this question of how is working with a coach different than working with a therapist when you're grieving? The funny thing is, I think 2 days after I got the survey results and I read them, a fellow coach, a friend, sent an email out to her community explaining the difference between coaching and therapy. And it's kind of funny how this happens, right? Where a question comes up in my community, she's addressing the same question in her community. So I kind of wanted to share what she said. Her name is Sarah. I'll also put her information in the show notes. She's a fantastic coach, good friend. She broke it down and she said in her email, this is kind of an oversimplification, but it's like the most basic terms of the difference between a coach and a therapist. So I want to share that with you because I don't think I could break it down any simpler than she did. So I want to share that. And then I want to explain what working with a grief coach would look like. So just the difference between a therapist and a coach on the surface, right? They may seem very similar. You meet, whether it's in person, over the phone, through Zoom or some electronic means, and you talk about stuff. Talk about what's not going quite the way you want it to be in your life or areas of improvement, least satisfaction, problem areas, right? It's not to say you can only use a coach or therapist in bad times, but oftentimes that is when you seek out somebody, is when you're not getting the result that you want in your life. That on the surface seems similar. You meet to talk about things. The client does the talking, the therapist or the coach does the listening, the asking questions, holding space for where that person is at. So the difference really comes in during the conversation, the content of the conversation. And Sarah broke it down into 3 things: the central question, the primary intention, and the main focus. So the central question a therapist asks is, what's wrong and how can I fix it? Where the coach asks, what do you want and how can I help you create it? So 2 very different questions. Again, this is a simplification, but the therapist is treating a problem essentially. The intention is you process to understand, whereas with a coach, the intention is to process to move forward. Then you have the focus. The therapist really works in the space of the past. unpacking all of the things that happened and how that informs your point of view today. The coach really explores the future. So you bring present day issues to both of them. The therapist really excavates the past, and the coach really looks at, how do we move forward? These things have happened. How do we move forward? What do we want to create? So I wanted to share that because I think those distinctions are very important to make. And it's a very simplistic way to break it down, but it's a very true, accurate way to break it down. You might be wondering, okay, so I want to work with a coach. I'm curious. I want to move forward. I want to see what I can create, but I'm grieving. How does that work? So I was trained in coaching. I did my life coach certification through Martha Beck, and she has the Wayfinder Life Coach program. And really, that is about getting in touch with your essential self, meaning who you are at your core, without all the noise, without all the inputs from everybody else, the cultural conditioning telling you who you should be and how you should be. It's really getting down to you and what you want for yourself, what you want for your life. And she teaches this thing called the transformation cycle. And so there's 4 squares. And typically when somebody comes to you for coaching, the issue that they bring is in one of those 4 squares, and kind of depending where that is dependent on where the conversation is going to go, the tools that you might introduce to the conversation, what you might work with. So if you're in grief, I want to explain how this change cycle applies to you. So if you're in square 1, you're in that meltdown phase. It's chaotic. It's difficult. It's disorienting. It's where you feel like your world is falling apart. You experience the intense emotions and the sense of loss. When you're in square 1, you may not know what's going on. You may just feel very overwhelmed, confused. You got a lot of emotions going. And square 1 is brought on by a catalytic event, meaning something happened. There was a change or there was a loss that caused the meltdown. I look at this as, and it's not exclusively true, but when you're in very early stages of grief, you're coming to the coach in square 1. Everything's just falling apart. You don't know what's going on, and you're trying to make sense of it. So if that's the place that you're at, you're feeling that acute pain, that loss is fresh, you're grieving. What we're doing in this time when you work with a coach is you're acknowledging your feelings, you're accepting those feelings, you're feeling the feelings, right? You're exploring them, you're not pushing them down. We're working in the space of you're showing up as your whole full self, even as messy as that might be sometimes. And I'm holding space for you as the coach. I'm meeting you where you are and holding that space, letting you show up and tell all of the ugly truths that you don't want to tell anybody else. I'm providing you support during that time, right? I'm being there, I'm holding the space, I'm listening, I'm asking powerful questions. And also, we're working with some coping strategies. And those coping strategies really help fuel that mind-body connection. A lot of times when we're in grief, we can get stuck on the thoughts of guilt or anxiety. You get very stuck in your mind. So to get out of those negative thought loops, those difficult thought loops, what we want to do is we want to bring you down into your body. A lot of that mind-body connection, getting into presence, into mindfulness. And also we're working with physical self-care. When you're going through a really difficult time, one of the first things that we tend to do is neglect ourselves. We don't take care of ourselves. We don't take care of the physical body. So we get into physical self-care strategies. What can you do to take care of yourself? What do you need right now? What does that look like? How are you going to build it into your day? And really, it's just about small comforts that can bring you stability. We're also going to do grief work, meaning we're going to work with everything you're feeling in your grief. You're going to express your emotions, whether through talking or maybe you're going to do some written exercises, creativity. We're going to discuss the dreams that you're having, everything that's coming up, right? We might do visualizations, naming the feeling, getting into your body. So we're doing grief work. We're understanding how that's impacting you. We're feeling everything that goes with it, which can change moment to moment. And we're just unpacking that. And also we're building a support network, whether it's between coach and client, or also we're really looking at where can you find support in your life? What does that look like? How do we build that in? And that's where also you may consider coming into like the living with loss grief circle. So that way you can have that shared experience with other people that understand grief and loss and what you're going through. So there's square two, right? And this is kind of the reformation phase where you start to see glimmers of hope. You start imagining a future with your grief. This devastating, difficult, challenging thing has happened, and you've been in the pain, but you're starting to wonder what else? What's next? It's not minimizing the grief, it's not denying the grief. It's getting curious of what your identity in your life is going to look like now that the loss has happened. So in this phase, what we're going to do is we're going to explore new possibilities. We're going to explore interests, get curious. We're going to create a vision for what that future could be. A lot of it's dreaming, imagining what's possible. And there's a lot of different ways we can access this information to understand what you truly want for your life. So there's a lot of space for imagining, for daydreaming, and it's really a safe way to explore new identities and new paths. That question of what's next. Sometimes we can get stuck in our head and we can't see any one right thing, but when we start exploring this question with that mind-body connection, with your inner knowing, with tapping into your intuition and using different tools, different visualizations to kind of explore this and what it looks like, you're going to gain wisdom from yourself. You're going to really start to feel shifts and want to explore those shifts a little bit more. So we'll be working in the space of small changes, right? Maybe it's tiny outward changes, maybe exploring what that new identity could look like. And also there's a lot of information gathering. And by that, I mean, who are you now that this loss happened? What are you curious about? Or what do you long for in your life? What do you yearn for? What do you wish were true? Right? And so it's really diving into that. And also, again, it's exploring new things, right? Maybe try out some different hobbies. Maybe you get involved with different groups. You explore the options. It's really about that dreaming and scheming and the what's possible. We're not diving into fixing or making it so. Really, this phase is giving you that space to tap into that inner knowing to see what's there and just kind of seeing where it leads us. Square three, it's when you're emerging from the chrysalis, right? If you're in that change cycle, that transformation cycle, and we're thinking butterfly, square three is really you're starting to emerge from the chrysalis, meaning if you're here, right, we're dreaming and when we're in square two and we have all these possibilities of what might be true for your life moving forward. Once we get into phase three, we're going to get into some action. And with that comes some setbacks. It's not like, oh, we've got this dream, we've got this vision, it's going to be perfect. Nope. We're going to explore it. We're going to try some things on. We're going to get out into the world and experiment. Really, that's what that is about. It's about taking action towards those goals that you dreamed up. What does that look like? And when you hit the roadblocks, how do we get over them? And also, this is a time for learning how to persist through the challenges. It's about learning from the setbacks. So we'll probably do some goal setting, some planning, breaking the goals down into very small, manageable steps, creating plans for achieving them. There's a lot of encouragement in this phase, right? Where I'm checking in with you. I want to know how it's going. I want to know where you're at in the plans that we've created. And also, we're planning accountability systems. If you want to do this new thing, it's brand new, you haven't been doing it, how do you build that accountability into your day, into your life? So that way you can keep those commitments to yourself. You can work towards the things that you say you want to work towards. There's a lot of problem solving here, right? So if you're just kind of trying things out, you set some goals and you're working towards them. And like I said, everything doesn't go as planned. We know that, right? We're grieving. We've had loss. We know that life doesn't go the way that we want it to. We know that things come up that can't be planned for, that are unexpected. It's really working around these setbacks that come up. And sometimes they're emotional setbacks. Sometimes it's fears or limiting beliefs or thoughts or something else bad happens in your life and kind of throws you back into a tailspin, right? So we're working with all of this. We're adapting, we're problem solving, and we're also celebrating because it's not an easy thing to really excavate your soul, essentially, really dig in and figure out what you want for yourself. And then beyond that, start getting into action. That's not an easy thing to do. So we're going to celebrate those small successes along the way. We're going to stay flexible. We're going to build that flexibility. into the way that we do things. So there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error here. Like I said, we're setting goals, we're breaking them down into tiny, small, manageable steps so you can reach them. And square 4 is like that full flight, right? You're the butterfly. You've navigated these big changes. You're carrying that grief with you in a way that makes sense. You've integrated the loss into your life. And now that's not to say you're never going to have a bad day or it's not going to be difficult or it's going to happen overnight, but you're living that new reality that we were dreaming of at one point. You're living it. You're in it. And in this phase, what we're doing is we're working to sustain that new identity, that new lifestyle. We're looking for growth and improvement, right? This is like the fine-tuning phase. And a lot of it is really just making those small adjustments. It's about enhancing your life at this point. It could be maybe we're refining your routines, we're building new skills, we're finding new and different ways to reduce stress, to increase joy. That goal that was a little bit small, we're making it bigger so you can really lean into this new identity. And we're also preparing for future changes because the thing is, change is a part of life. It's always going to happen. It's always going to come up. And so this is really leaning into the tools and the strategies to be able to handle future transitions, the hard things that come up. So in talking about this is a change cycle that applies to your life, not to your grief, right? Like I'm not trying to push you through phases with your grief. That's not what we're doing. The thing is, when you're grieving, your grief permeates every part of your life. It impacts your relationships, your productivity, your energy levels, your career, how you feel about yourself, your identity, what's important to you. It impacts every bit of your life. And so this change cycle allows us to kind of see where you're at. And you could be in different places in different parts of your life, right? Maybe this loss, let's say it's a divorce, right? Maybe this divorce has really hurt your self-esteem, your self-identity, right? Like that's that we're in meltdown about that. You've seen yourself as this person's partner, this person's wife, this person's husband, and now that identity is no longer there. And maybe your finances have taken a huge hit because of the divorce, right? So we're in the space of your finances are a bit upside down because you're not in that dual income situation and you're struggling with your self-worth, your self-esteem. And also there's the grief from the loss that we're working with. That's just one example. There's so many ways that losses and grief can impact different areas of your life. Maybe you got fired or laid off from a job. Your career, your work life is in a complete tailspin, right? Like everything's gone up in flames there. You're like, what's next? I don't know what to do. I don't even know how to begin to look for a job. It's changed again how you see yourself. Or maybe you got a new job, right? It's that good change and you're like, man, this is awesome. This is the job I wanted. But you've got a lot of emotion around not seeing the same people every day, stepping into this new role and what that means for your identity. And you're riding that roller coaster of emotion. So these are just a few small examples. But when you work with a grief coach, we do tend to the grief and we tend to your self-care and we tend to your emotional stability and we look forward. It's not a pushing. It's not a you have to get there. You have to get over anything. It's not. It's reimagining who you're going to be in your life now that these things have happened. I hope this is helpful. First of all, identifying the need for support can be difficult. Then trying to decide what type of support is right for you can also be very difficult. You need a coach. Do you need a therapist? Do you want to work with a group? Do you want a peer-to-peer counselor? Like what is it that would serve you best? And for that, I would say coaching and therapy, I think, are complementary, right? I don't think it has to be an either or. It could be a both and, or maybe one is a better fit for you at one time or another. But I think when you're grieving and you're going through change, you're going through loss, the important thing is recognizing when you need some support and then experimenting with what that support might look like. And I say experimenting because let's say you've landed on coaching. You're like, I'm in a place where I do want to tend to my grief, but I also want to figure out how to move forward with that grief. So I want to work with coach. Maybe the first coach you work with isn't a right fit. That doesn't mean you don't need coaching. Maybe the type of coaching that person was doing wasn't what you needed. Or maybe your personalities, your styles, your core values, your worldviews didn't align. It's not a good fit. Doesn't mean you don't need coaching. It doesn't mean you don't want coaching. It means maybe that coach isn't the right fit. And this is true of anybody that you work with, right? Whether it's a doctor, a therapist, just because you go to them for their services doesn't mean their service is going to be a perfect match for you. But just because that particular person and what they're offering isn't a perfect match doesn't mean there isn't a match out there for you. And I say that because I experienced this specifically with finding a therapist. So I was going through a challenging time, and I felt like a lot of things from my past were influencing or compounding what was going on in my present. And I was just trying to work through a lot of different stuff. So I was like, you know what? I want to work with a therapist. The first therapist I went to, I felt like was judging me. I didn't feel comfortable talking to her. So I'm like, well, if I can't open up to my therapist, not the right fit. I go to another therapist. And I felt like that one was lecturing me and telling me what to do. I don't want somebody telling me what to do. I want to arrive at my own knowing. So that therapist, not a right fit. Went to another therapist. Things seemed really good, seemed like a good fit. We were working well. I felt like I was making progress, getting results. And then I found myself being dishonest to my therapist. I'm like, well, there's something in play there, whether it's a power dynamic, people pleasing, not really sure. But if I, again, can't show up as my full self, be honest, not a right fit. That doesn't mean, well, I'm done with therapy, I'm not going to do it. No, it means I'm going to see if there's a better match. And I eventually landed on this one person, and we worked together for 2 years, and it was great. It was a fantastic fit. I learned a lot about myself, unpacked a lot of things. But I share that example just because if you're curious about working with a coach, working with a therapist, again, maybe it's seeing a doctor, whatever it is, and you go and it doesn't feel aligned, that doesn't mean you abandon that curiosity to work with that service provider. It means try working with a different one, finding that fit, honoring yourself, honoring the curiosity and the desire. So I hope this is helpful. Again, I know the distinctions between the therapist and coach are kind of simplistic, but I do feel like it holds true. So something to think about if you're wondering what's the right thing for you during your time of need. Hopefully this conversation can be helpful, answer some questions for you. And I wanted to let you know that I do connect with people that are interested in grief coaching. I provide grief coaching, but we don't have to just jump into like you're signing a contract and you're working with me and you're locked in and that's it. No, there's time and space for that exploration. We can get on a call, we can talk, we can meet and do some coaching. See if you feel a benefit, see if you like it, see if it feels true and aligned for you. And if it does, we can move forward. And if it doesn't, hopefully you got some stuff out of our conversations and that'll be that. So if you're curious and you're like, I think I may want to work with coach and you think I could be a good fit for you, I encourage you to hop on my website and just fill out a little form on the one-to-one coaching page. And it says one-to-one grief support on the website. Click on that little form to contact me and I respond back to every form that comes in within 48 hours. We set up a call and we talk about our options and we do some coaching right at the gate so you can experience it. So I encourage you to do that if you're curious, if you may want to work with a grief coach. And in the meantime, if you need some support during your time of grief, loss, I have a free guide, 5 essential tools for immediate relief from grief on my website. So if you just go to my homepage, www.adriancrowley.com, that first top area, there's a button that is there to click to get your free guide. So I encourage you to check that out and hopefully it can serve you. Every tool isn't for everybody, but there is something in there that will provide you relief from your grief. And all of the strategies are pretty easy to implement. They're very practical. They're very doable. They're very accessible. So I encourage you, if you need some support, some relief from your grief, definitely grab that guide. There'll also be a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. But if you just go to my website, there's buttons everywhere to click for it to get it. So again, I hope this is helpful for you. I hope this distinction has been helpful. And as always, I'm here if you need anything, reach out, let's connect. And until next time, I hope you have a great week. That's it for today's episode, my friends. Thanks so much for joining me on the Living with Loss podcast. Please like and follow the show so you don't miss an episode. If you're looking for more grief support, grab my free guide, 5 essential tools for immediate relief from grief, even if you don't think that's possible. Head on over to adriancrowley.com and download it. Remember, you may not have chosen all the changes or losses in your life, but you get to choose what happens next. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Until then, have a fantastic week.